Awesome. I think we'll start it out then.
Awesome.
All right. So today's presenters, Dan Giordano, that is myself. I run product marketing manager for the ReadyAPI tool suite. We have Nick Bellinger, solutions engineer on TestComplete, and we have Mike Hawley, solutions engineer on SoapUI Pro. And we'll be talking you through some slides today and then some demos on both products. All right, so our poll question today is, which types of testing are you responsible for? And go through, we'll just give a quick 30 seconds. All right, we're almost 50%, solid. All right, we'll just give it another 5 seconds. All right, we'll end that. Let me share the results quick with you guys. And you can see right there, pretty awesome. 62% responsible for both. So hopefully this webinar should really help you out and see what you can explore with the SmartBear toolset. All right, take that away. All right, so SmartBear. Who are we real quick? We're a Boston-based company with 7 offices globally that focus on creating solutions for developers, testing, and operations teams to help them instill quality throughout the entire development lifecycle. We're founded in 2009, and we continue to add products to our portfolio, including 2 wildly popular open source tools, SoapUI and Swagger, and then our newest additions to the club in CrossBrowser Testing, and now actually HipTest, which is a recent purchase from about 2 weeks ago. So that is definitely our freshest, newest product on the block. And today we'll be focusing on 2 primary areas. We create quality assurance and design tools for the entire software delivery lifecycle. But today we're going to be focused on UI test automation with TestComplete and API test automation with SoapUI Pro. Just a quick, brief interruption for everyone. This is kind of our advertisement here. This is SmartBear User Conference. It's our second one we're running. You can find more at the address listed there, smartbear.com/connect-2018. This was an amazing experience last year with guest speakers and customers sharing years of knowledge and experience. This year we'll be right downtown in Boston at the Marriott Copley. So be sure to not miss it. You can get a couple, $100 off if you purchase an early bird ticket. So definitely visit now and scoop one up, and you guys can join us.
And if you need any more incentive, we're all going to be there. So if you like this little webinar and you want to see the face behind the voice, definitely come on down.
Yeah, we'll have product leaders there. We'll have our sales engineers. We'll have really everyone there on deck, being able to talk with you and then kind of show you all of our solutions. All right, so let's get to today's agenda. We'll be talking about why we need test automation, shifting left with automation, how that helps out. We'll be covering, of course, API testing and then UI testing. And then we have a short demo on both tools so we can walk through and actually see the tools in action. And then we'll have a live Q&A at the end. So please feel free to take part in today's webinar and ask as many questions as possible. All right, so today we'll be talking a lot about automation, whether that's at the UI or API layer. We'll be covering the topic indefinitely. And I want to start with basically why we're so obsessed with automation in this case. And the theme here generally is going to be time savings. First, we can start with faster deployment cycles. For Agile and DevOps teams, this is going to be key. Automating tests can help teams deploy often and still deploy with a sense of confidence at every interval. Second is that it allows us to truly increase our test coverage. At the end of the day, there will always be a finite amount of time to actually test a product or an application, and teams with mainly manual testing will just not have sufficient test coverage across their app. Automation helps us truly achieve that and actually get an increase in test coverage without necessarily increasing our testing time always. And then lastly, we're getting instant feedback in our development cycle. You can spend all morning on a new feature, and then within 5 minutes of checking that new code in, you can actually get that instant feedback across multiple layers of the application without waiting. See here, this is kind of our traditional testing process. Maybe a manual testing might follow right now, but it has integration, system, and end-to-end testing happening well into the testing phase, costing us a significant amount of dollars per bug. According to an IBM study, bugs that are caught later in monitoring can cost as much as $1,500. Letting a customer catch a bug not only has a strict capital cost to us, but also a brand cost, right? No one likes to use applications that feel buggy or feel broken. By automating our testing, we can help ourselves test faster and earlier in the development process. We can significantly reduce the cost of a defect here by finding it in the development or early testing phase. If a developer is able to check in code, get an error back in 3 minutes, let's say from a Jenkins report, then they can go make that appropriate fix. That is a far better affordable scenario than if a developer works on, let's say, a new feature for a couple days, maybe a week, checks that new code in. It goes over to the QA side of the business. We wait another 2 weeks for that QA team to finish testing it. And then we get, let's say, a couple of errors back. Well, it's been maybe 3 weeks since I touched that code, and I might not have a firm understanding like I did if I had gotten that bug back with 3 minutes within check-in. So this is a great way to shift your testing left, or to actually shift your testing strategy completely left, find bugs earlier in the process, and fix them quicker at a cheaper rate.
And you'll understand that this concept isn't really something exclusive to testing. In all different parts of life, you'll understand that the sooner we've got an understanding of what's working and what isn't, the easier a time we're going to have recovering from any missteps we might have made.
Complicating that shifting left is the fact that today's application architecture is modular. Most of our applications today are service-oriented. They're made up of many, many APIs underneath. And all the building and functioning happens on one interface. So this means we need to not only test the actual UI and what we're seeing and interacting with, but we also need to test the multiple APIs underneath that layer. And just a quick, I guess, run back for anybody on the UI side that's not super familiar. We'll have our what is an API here. An API, or application programming interface, is a piece of software that allows one piece of software and application to actually make use of maybe a function or data that another application has inherent to itself. This is standardized by a couple different things, maybe a SOAP or REST call over HTTP or a Java messaging server. But basically, an example of an API might be, let's say, Google Maps API, which lets services like Uber or Seamless use their navigation system while still focusing their time on being the best ride-hailing app or being the best food delivery app in Seamless's case, but still getting access to that great service that is Google Maps. And you can think about it building a house, right? The same company that builds the roof tiles of your house probably doesn't also build the garage door. Our world is specialized, as has happened over hundreds of years of, let's say, capitalism. But that garage door maker, they've made hundreds of thousands of doors in the process and really perfected that action. Software and APIs are going the same way. Companies are specializing in certain functions like location services or messaging services with a company like Twilio, and they're allowing other applications to access that great function that they're supplying. And then we have the split right here of UI testing and API testing. Both are equally important. We really can't sacrifice one for the other, but we are testing different things in both. UI testing focuses on the user experience, the journey that that customer will literally take through the application. We could be looking for layout or visual errors on kind of the soft side, or functional errors that are present in the UI itself. Does a welcome screen appear after we enter our information here? Because it technically should, if our login information works. Is the data presented actually correctly in the UI? On our checkout page, if something costs $29.99, does the price actually display that? Does it display that without wrapping on 2 lines? Those are the things that we're looking at when we talk about UI testing. On the API side, we're thinking about things below kind of the surface, below the skin, if you will. We're testing for business logic, and we're running tests looking for data errors or variants, making sure the application is allowing a username of X and a password of Y to be authorized in your system. That's something that definitely is expressed in the UI. Again, if you can get through and see a welcome screen, that is actually going through the UI. But the actual call between the username and the password happens on the back end via an API. So we can test that action without actually writing a UI script in this case. An API and UI test automation is truly the future of software testing. Gartner and Forrester predict that by 2020, nearly 90% of all testing on applications and software will be automated. Exploratory testing will always be a necessary function of application development and kind of will always stick with that manual case. But other than that, automated API and UI testing is set to grow exponentially in the future. You can see here that API testing is obviously growing at an astonishing rate. But that's because there are truly some inherent advantages to testing that service layer. And immediately we see the first one. Testing of business logic can be conducted almost immediately after the first function is built. You don't have to wait until the end of a sprint to get a test out the door. You can poke and prod your API instantly as soon as it's laid down and kind of test that logic coming back out of it. API tests are also far less brittle than their UI counterparts. Generally, APIs move around a lot less than the interface of an application. We have no colors or sizes of, let's say, a button or any other cosmetic characteristics that actually change with an API. So we should be able to create tests that last throughout our kind of life cycle of the application. It's also far faster to execute these tests. API tests get simple responses in exchange for a simple request. Try running 300 UI tests in under a minute. It's just really physically impossible. You're not going to be able to do that. But you could technically do that with an API. SOAP UI Pro, we'll see, run through a couple of tests in just seconds. And then lastly here, we have faster root cause analysis. When an API fails, time to track down what caused that to fail is a lot shorter than when, let's say, a UI fails. A UI has many components to it, many dependencies. When something breaks, it might have been 10, 20, 50 different connections that actually caused that break. With an API, we're going to get right to that root cause. And taking you through kind of 4 key features of where SOAP UI Pro really helps out with this API testing that we're talking about. The first one here is it's completely scriptless. Although we do have scripting capabilities, SOAP UI can allow you to create complex assertions against a REST or a SOAP endpoint in minutes without knowing any actual technical knowledge. Right-click, make, again, really complex assertions against the response of the endpoint. Also, data-driven capabilities. You can link a CSV or a database right up to your tests and run through synthetic data to really boost your test coverage. We also allow for refactoring and code coverage across your tests. If you're making a change to kind of your testing model, you can make that change in one place and it will propagate across all the rest of your tests. And then we have an open plugin framework that's widely used. You can create plugins for us in Java and kind of extend that SOAP UI Pro to your own workflow. And taking it in the next direction, we'll talk about some UI testing things right here. So some challenges of UI testing that I think we really help out with. First is test maintenance. UI testing is expensive for most teams. Most of the cost is actually in maintaining those tests. Your UI is constantly changing, people are using new CSS patterns, changing images, let's just say. All these things are kind of going to throw off your test. If you pick a tool with a robust object or image spy repository there, it's really going to help you out, and we'll see TestComplete kind of shine there.
And this is one of the things we talk about all the time when we're demonstrating the TestComplete tool. There's obviously all different kinds of automated tools out there, and they might run the test the same way, but where you're really going to find the differences in how much effort you need to expend to keep those tests functioning as your applications continue to evolve over time.
Yeah, exactly. And that, again, it's not that the creation of the first test is really the expensive part. It's the fact that over a year or two, you're going to be making a lot of changes at front end, which thus means you're going to be making a lot of changes to the actual test scripts themselves. TestComplete, you'll see, make a change. You can make a change one place and really propagate across your entire test suite. So just like SOAP UI, we're trying to save time there. Another challenge of UI testing is you need an actual browser device to show your interface. Right? So something actually has to compile and show in a visual place. With UI testing, teams are purchasing a lot of equipment to actually test that, right? Different browsers, different mobile devices. It's definitely a complication of the UI side. And something like a cloud solution like cross-browser testing, which we'll investigate in the next actually slide, that can be a real help for teams, not only in reducing costs of their capital expenditure, but also helping out with its next point is taking test execution time and really speeding it up. So the test time is slow on UI testing. 300 UI tests, that's going to take a couple of hours to get through, especially even if you automate it. With solutions like test execute and cross-browser testing, you can run those tests in parallel and really able to chug through those tests in literally 100x time. So let's say you have 100 different tests that are testing different things, different browsers. With cross-browser testing, you can actually take those test scripts, throw them up, and run them against 100 different devices at one singular point in time. So something like, let's say the average test time is going to take 3 minutes. If you have 100 tests and 100 different devices to run them on, we can keep that testing time to literally 3 minutes.
That last point is something we see people fall into all the time. It's essentially a trap. You've got a finite amount of time. You don't have all these resources at your disposal, and you're essentially forced to make hard choices. What browsers do I really care about? Who do I really want to deliver the best experience to? And by finding a nicely fine-tuned UI automation tool, you're not going to have to make as many compromises like that. You'll be able to deliver the same great experience, regardless of the way in which users are accessing your content.
Yeah, and actually this is going to speak to it on this next slide right here. This is really how TestComplete is going to help with some of those challenges. Our 3 points here come across with the robust object repository. We'll be going through this as well, but tools that have a nice object repository, nice image-based modeling capabilities. This is something where Selenium kind of falls down at points. You actually have to code each time for an object for Selenium. If that object class changes or just one characteristic that you created that test against, that test will now fail. With something like TestComplete, we're a little bit smarter. Let's say we move it outside of a div. There are other characteristics that will still be able to latch on and make that test pass and kind of not throw off your build time. Another thing we have is we have access to cross-browser testing. So TestComplete integrates with cross-browser testing, which is a cloud platform that has access to over 1,500 real desktop and mobile browsers. So we're able to run those tests out of TestComplete against different Windows browsers, different versions. And again, we can run those in parallel to cut down on time.
Something to add to that, and this is another one of those things that you don't pay that much of a mind to when you're beginning an automated testing exploration, but will quickly catch up to you if you're not careful. It's all well and good to set up environments within your own institution to run these tests upon, but you need to be very cognizant of the maintenance time involved. I've seen individuals on teams have their job morph into being entirely focused on updating browsers and keeping computers up and ready for tests. And that's certainly not the situation you want to find yourself in.
Yeah, exactly. And then lastly, we have here is our data-driven testing capability. So again, like SoapUI Pro, we have the ability to either hook up a CSV, Excel file, or actually connect to a database, or synthetically create this data and actually drive them through our tests. So let's say a good front end, maybe have a few logins, a few core actions. That's not going to cover all the boundaries of bad data, either attacking a login screen with a long form email or maybe short. These things are difficult to test and will take a long time if you're trying to hard code them into multiple UI tests. With data-driven testing and TestComplete, we can facilitate that entire action much more quickly. All right, and that is going to cover our slides for today. And now we're going to kind of toss it over to Mike and Nick to cover an actual demo. So Mike, if you want to grab hold of the screen, I think I can make that happen.
All right, excellent. Thanks very much, everyone. My name is Michael Hawley. I'm a sales engineer over here at SmartBear, covering the API side of our tooling here. And today we're going to be talking about this little web application for our demonstration today, and using SoapUI Pro to help not only create functional tests against our backend service here, but also automate this entire process. So the example that we have today is this little React app that was created by a colleague of ours. We have a few buttons here on the screen and a backend that we connect to with an API, giving us some NFL data that was scraped from the NFL website. So for this example, we're going to make a couple of calls today. So I'll give a quick representation of what that would look like from the front end. So we're going to go to week 2 and take a look at the New England and Miami game. This gives us some info about the different plays. It gives us some scoring information. And then we'll be able to see using some API calls via a couple of URLs in SoapUI Pro, how we can make these same kinds of calls from our backend, and then do some validating, data-driven testing and automation within SoapUI. All right, so here we have in front of us, this is the ReadyAPI suite of tools, and we're currently in SoapUI Pro. I've got 2 requests here reaching out to that backend service. We've got our backend hosted on port 4567. So we'll reach out, we'll get back some JSON information here. All right. We're passing along some information about a specific game in week 2. So we're taking that result, going into the response of our previous request, pulling in the actual game number, New England Miami, 486 rather, making that request against our backend and expecting some results here. All right. Thanks. All right. Within our data source, we've got a few different options. Currently, as it stands, we're using this grid option here to manually input some data and create some properties here to populate the table. We can also make different kinds of connections using our backend via JDBC connection and making SQL calls against our backend service. We can pull in tables from Excel, CSV files, or we can parse out large and complex JSON or XML objects. Right? So this really allows us to leverage our backend, our real data that we want to be using to make these calls against our APIs, and then validating what we're getting back to that real data with expected responses, edge cases, or information coming from a database. We can take this test that we've created, that full data-driven functionality, all of the validations that we've created within SoapUI, and we can start automating this. But first, I want to talk a little bit about the validations that we've created. Within SoapUI, we have this outline tab here, which breaks down our JSON or XML responses into this tree-like structure, which really gives us an accessible way of not only reading this data, but also validating the results. So now that we've passed in a value within our request 2 from our previous response, with a right click, I'm going to make sure that we're getting back this validating these scores with our validation. So with a right click, I'm going to add an assertion for the content, which is matching the value from our response to our data source. And with a right click, using this get data option, I'm going to navigate once again to our data source step and then pull in that away score. So this creates a dynamic reference to that data source and the particular value here. So we'll save that and see that we're trying to match against that content. So now that we've connected this, let's run our test case. There we go. And it looks like we got a failure. If we had any more rows within this data source, we can use this data source loop to start iterating through this and really make this a nice dynamic process, being able to not only test our APIs and use real backend data, but we can also use this to start looping through and iterating very quickly and very easily. And we can see up here that normally from a manual process, this would take a few seconds, a few minutes to actually make the API call and validate the response. But we can see how this is taken with 2 API calls and the validations that we've already created, 0.2 less than a second here. All right. So from here, now that we've created our test case, with a right click, I'm going to launch this test runner utility that allows this test case to be called from a command line tool. So we can hit this from our own command line. We can hit this from a CI/CD pipeline or a tool like Jenkins. So we're going to set this up. We're going to specify the scope so we can run this entire project, or very specifically this one test case here. I'm going to reference this test runner script within the installation of ReadyAPI, and then I'm going to create some reports based on what we've created here. So as I launch this, ReadyAPI will start executing this. But what I really wanted to show off today is this little 2-line script that ReadyAPI is generating, which is just a CD change, a directory change to the bin directory within ReadyAPI, and executing this test runner batch file, which consumes these command line arguments that we've created using the test runner utility. To see this in action, I've created a Jenkins example, so we can see how this test was configured, and we can see how Jenkins is going to consume this script. So based on some form of build triggers, we can run this periodically. We can run this when we push a piece of code to a repository tool like GitHub or Bitbucket. And then we want Jenkins to actually execute this script, and we can see how this is being run in a build action. So this can be run from your Windows machine, or we can generate a shell script for your Linux or Unix users. And then in a post-build action, we're going to be creating a JUnit style XML report to be read by Jenkins. So when we save this, take a look at our build history, this past, this failure here. We can see how using Jenkins and ReadyAPI, not only were we able to streamline this entire process and run in the background so we can focus on more important things like creating more tests for coverage or developing more of our application. We can also see how Jenkins is reporting any of our failures here. So we'll have this stack trace containing our expected values versus what we're actually returning from the API. And we're also getting back the full request response transaction here. So this is really good information for our developers to have to be able to make those corrections to our backend database, the API, and have these tests running more and more successfully in the long run here. All right, so that was just a brief example of the power of using our API in the back end of this React application, reaching out, pulling in that data driving this entire process, using real data or something like a database or an Excel file. We can validate the results with a couple of clicks and reference that real data again. And then we can start automating this entire process using Jenkins and the test runner utility within ReadyAPI. All right, so I'm going to turn this over to Nick for the UI side of things. So now that we've determined our backend is functioning correctly, we want to be able to ensure that that data is being rendered to the front end.
Awesome, awesome. So that is my cue. Hello again, everyone. My name is Nick. I am the TestComplete engineer here at SmartBear, and I'm going to be guiding you through the TestComplete portion today. So at this point, we're just going to be flipping our screens around really quickly, and you'll get a nice little view of my desktop. So just as Michael was running that test against the NFL stats site, we're going to be creating some UI tests against it. And in fact, we're going to be looking at a few of the neat things that go on within TestComplete. What we just saw from Mike was a great view into what we see about a web page when we're doing API tests against it, the information being passed back and forth, and all of those nitty-gritty little details. That's what APIs are concerned with, the communication between different portions. What we're working on with the UI is slightly different. We're more interested in what's the users actually being shown, what is being displayed to them. With TestComplete, you're going to be able to make sure everything that is being rendered on screen is showing up accurately, that it contains the proper content and all of that good stuff. The first thing we're going to be taking a look at is how TestComplete sees this web page. So what this is going to involve is going in, and we're going to hop into TestComplete itself. And this is a sample test we're looking at here, but before that, we're just going to get a view as to what TestComplete knows about this web page by popping open our object SPY. The Object Spy is a nifty little utility within the TestComplete tool. It is the single easiest way to get an understanding of what TestComplete actually sees within your application. Now, as I click and drag this around my screen, you're going to be able to see that TestComplete sees all kinds of stuff. So if I move this a little bit out of the way for you all, you'll notice that we're able to identify the individual items in this game panel. We can see the individual weeks. We're able to see this little header over here and all these individual little plays and all the data that lives within them. In some ways, it's easier to wrap your head around what TestComplete is doing because it very closely corresponds with what you see when you interact with a web page. So for instance, if I point this at this little string containing Buffalo at New York, information on that game, and we scroll on down here, we're able to see all the different things TestComplete knows about it. And right here within our content text is all those good little bits of detail about what lives within that text field. This is the robust object recognition capabilities we're talking about earlier. And right now, I'm just going to briefly explain why you might even be interested in object-based testing. Earlier on, I was speaking towards the fact that there's all different kinds of automated testing tools out in the market today. And they have wide-ranging capabilities, bits of functionality. It's a lot like the Wild West out there today. And one of the things you'll find as you look around at these tools is that the vast majority of them are going to be working based on coordinates or images. All those tools understand is where you click on screen. They're essentially blind to everything else going on, and that makes for remarkably unstable tests. Classic example of this is that, let's say, hopping back into our web page here, let's say that we create a test that's working upon this little game item here, this Buffalo at New York. Well, if you turn around tomorrow and now that item is down here, a coordinate-based test is going to fall flat on its face. And that's where the maintenance comes into play, because you're now going into these individual tests, tweaking them, and it's eating up all of your time that you could be spending enhancing your test coverage or tackling other objectives within your organization. So that is the primary benefit of object-based recognition within TestComplete. And if we hop back into the tool itself, we're going to get a quick look at what you might see once you've made a TestComplete test against this application. Now, if I hop in here, and I'm just going to zoom in a little bit, ladies and gentlemen. So this is the body of a TestComplete test we see here. Those are the few steps that comprise this test, and all it's really doing is clicking on one of the weeks, selecting a game, and then validating the score that shows up within that header. I'm going to go ahead and run this so you can get a view into what it looks like when TestComplete is running the show, and then we'll go back to the tool itself, and we're going to have a few additional discussions about the other neat things I can do in here. Now, if I go ahead and close my browser down, and then I tell this test to run, you are going to see that Firefox will be opening right up. We're going to navigate to that little old URL, and now you're going to see it do sample workflow through this process. So selecting the second week, now it's going to select that Miami at New England game, and the last thing it's doing is validating that price. It was identifying those objects based on core properties. So again, if the user interface was rearranged in any way, it's not going to slow TestComplete down at all. All right, so that was a view at what a TestComplete test looks like. It was a view at what we see when it runs, and a discussion of why we might want to pursue object-based identification as opposed to some of the other alternatives out there. What we're going to be doing next is getting a better understanding of how TestComplete organizes this information. One of the terms Dan threw around in that intro was something called an object repository. For those of you who aren't familiar with that concept, all it amounts to is this. If your tool is identifying and acting against objects, it needs some place it can store that information, a place it can look to when it's told to perform an action so it knows what it's trying to do. Well, TestComplete has just such an object repository, and we refer to it as the name mapping. So if I hop down into this name mapping and then I expand it out, we'll be able to see that little stat application as it's broken down within the hierarchy. Zooming in here a little bit, so that main body there, starting with where it says NFL Stat App, is how this application is actually being seen. This is the hierarchy TestComplete follows. It's how it's keeping its house in order. So you'll notice, and I'm going to bring this up in anticipation of the images that will appear, You'll notice that as I highlight different items within this hierarchy, we can see an image representation of them over here. This is a great way to keep your head on straight and understand what these objects are actually referencing. So this is the hierarchy itself. This is the look under the hood, just to give a little bit more clarity as to what's going on here. If we were to tell TestComplete to interact with an individual object within our page, like say the results header right there, it would go ahead and search down this list. It'd start with the web page itself and move its way on down. It's going to find these different objects based on core identifiers, and you can view the identifiers we're using right over here. So in the case of our web page, we're not doing anything too advanced. We're just looking for an object whose object type is a web page and whose URL matches that pattern. I am empowered to change the properties in use anytime I desire. This is going to put you in charge. If you've got a close relationship with the developers, if you have a good understanding of how the application was built, you're going to know exactly where you need to go and exactly what you should hook this into. The end goal is you want to choose those identifiers that are most reliable, things that aren't liable to change. And TestComplete is going to give you a very healthy list of options to pick from when you're adding these new objects in. All right, ladies and gentlemen. So that was a look at creating a TestComplete test. We got a peek under the hood at the name mapping, and we're almost done with this portion, but there's just a few additional things that are worth mentioning. One of the neat things that TestComplete can do to really help you speed up your process is making it dead simple to switch the browser your tests run with. So if we talk about your Selenium or some of the other automated tools out there, if you create a test for a specific browser, often that's the end of the story. They're inextricably linked until the end of time. And this means you're going to be duplicating work left, right, and center. It's going to cause you organizational problems as you keep track of all this stuff. It's simply not a good thing, and it's absolutely horrid for your efficiency. Within TestComplete, we have a better approach. You'll notice we've got a run browser step right at the top of this test. It's currently set to use Firefox because that's the browser I recorded this in. But a double click here, and I can change the browser this runs against. It really is as easy as that. There's a lot of development work that went into making this possible, but the end result is absolutely worth it. I can, in essence, quadruple my coverage with a single test just by changing the browsers it runs against. And we can do all kinds of additional fancy things here, like easily make loops so that it iterates across these browsers, and so on and so forth. The last thing I'm going to leave you with today is one of the integrations TestComplete offers to another tool within our portfolio, the CrossBrowser Testing tool. As Dan was talking about during the introduction, one of the toughest things about user interface testing in today's day and age is the sheer variety of different devices that people are going to be using to access your content. It can be very, very tricky to make sure everything's working as intended. And although you could, with a single machine, test a number of different browsers, you're going to be somewhat shackled to the operating system your computer is running on. And as you start to expand the number of available operating systems, you're going to be drastically expanding the amount of maintenance you need to perform to keep those boxes in ship shape. This is where cross-browser testing comes into play, because using the cross-browser testing integration, which lives right over here, we can take tests we have created locally and set them to run in cross-browser testing's cloud environment without drastically increasing the hassle on us, because we'll take care of all the major headaches like browser maintenance and making sure everything's up and running consistently. Using this integration is about as easy as it gets. It might be one of the very easiest things to do within the TestComplete tool. That's because all it entails is specifying what tests you want to run in these cloud environments. So for instance, I could go ahead and drag over the test we just made. And then I'm going to be able to specify my environments from these drop-down menus. I can choose as many as I want. I could span the whole range and associate multiple environments with the same test. And then with the Run Test button, that test will be sent to those cloud environments to be executed, and then the results will be returned back to me, nice and cleanly without any added difficulties or extra steps. This is a great way to really save time. And again, it's all about the maintenance and the reliability, not only maintaining your scripts, but also maintaining the locations where those scripts will be run. The very last thing I'm going to leave you with today as part of my little demonstration is our local connection. And this is an important consideration if you're still developing websites and they aren't yet out in the open internet. Cross-browser testing, as well as TestComplete, is able to create a tunnel to your local network. And without getting too high-flying and technical, the end result is that we're going to be able to access all those internally hosted websites, everything you've got behind your firewalls, all of it, without any additional difficulty, with just the flick of a switch. All right, everyone. So that is the TestComplete portion of today's discussion. We took a look at creating a test. We took a look at what created tests look like and the name mapping that supports these tests. And we also had a quick discussion about expanding our coverage throughout multiple browsers, either by iterating across ones available on our local machine, as well as distributing these tests out through the cloud to the cross-browser testing environments.
All right, sounds good. We have a lot of questions here rolling in. One actually, which is pretty funny. Nick, you want to tell us what today's date is? We have a couple questions that asked if that was a pre-recording.
Oh, yeah. No, today's date is Thursday the 17th, ladies and gentlemen.
All right, sounds good. We have some other ones. Can we run TestComplete tests through a command line at all?
Yeah, you absolutely can. Just like ReadyAPI has its own command line, TestComplete has one as well, and it's not unique to it. It's just the basic Windows command line. Because we've got this command line in place, you can do all kinds of neat stuff.
Awesome. And does this test just the web, or you want to tell us a little bit more about what we're testing or what we could test?
Yeah, I'd love to talk more about this, and because this isn't just another way TestComplete differentiates itself. We can test against web, desktop, and native mobile applications.
All right, awesome. And then can we perform testing on different versions of the same browser? I actually think you did that.
The answer is yes, if there's any ambiguity.
All right. And then on the SOAP side, we have a couple questions about actually the difference between SOAP UI and JMeter here.
Sure. Yeah. So SOAP UI is, we made SOAP UI to cater to a wider range of technical users and a technical audience. So we really focus on some of the ease of use and some of the quality of life improvements over something like JMeter. So as a user of SOAP UI, you don't need a vast technical knowledge of scripting in order to create the same kinds of validations and data-driven testing and just general functionality over a tool like JMeter. But we're still able to do a lot of these really powerful and robust kinds of tests that we would need to do something with something like JMeter.
And then, yeah, real quick with JMeter too, I think JMeter focuses a lot on the performance side, whereas SOAP UI open source kind of focused on the actual functional side. And then SOAP UI Pro is part of the ReadyAPI platform here, which is our entire API lifecycle testing product. So within ReadyAPI, we have SOAP UI Pro. We have Load UI Pro, which is really that performance load testing capability product that's going to be a huge advantage over actually using JMeter. And then we have Service V, which will help you virtualize those assets. Another question. We can create a new Selenium test case that tests 5 elements on 15 different browsers in about 4 hours. What do you think the creation rate could be using TestComplete?
Yeah, so that's a really interesting question. In general, I'm going to go out on a limb and say it is faster, especially if you aren't super comfortable with Selenium scripting. That said, if you do just write Selenium scripts all day long, it might wash out to be more of an even tie. But there's certainly not going to be a situation where TestComplete is drastically slower than going through the Selenium approach.
All right. Does TestComplete have something similar to Selenium Grid that allows tests to be dynamically executed in parallel?
It absolutely does. We have a little utility called Test Execute. That is the execution-only module. You can install that on as many machines as you'd like, and then TestComplete can distribute tests out to those boxes to run your tests in parallel.
All right. Do we need cross-browser testing along with TestComplete, or can TestComplete be run in a standalone environment?
TestComplete can absolutely be run standalone, but the whole portion of our discussion about distributing to cloud environments will not be possible without a cross-browser testing instance available within your organization.
All right. And then we have a couple scripting questions too. So actually to both of you, you want to cover what you can script in TestComplete and what you can script with in SoapUI Pro?
Yeah, so I'll go ahead and start. You've got a number of different options within TestComplete. The full list is JavaScript, JScript, C++ script, C# script, VB script, Delphi script, and Python.
And with SoapUI Pro and ReadyAPI, we support Groovy scripting primarily, and also JavaScript.
All right, awesome. So we have tools kind of that can be used by the developer side, and anybody comfortable with scripting can kind of create extensible automated test scripts, but also we have a lot of great, simple, non-technical capabilities with our point and click and record and replay. All right. SoapUI free version with Jenkins. You want to talk a little bit about how we're making that easier in SoapUI Pro to actually operate in your CI/CD workflow?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's a lot of the, honestly, it's a lot of the same functionality. We still have that test runner that you're going to be executing from SoapUI Pro or SoapUI open source. With ReadyAPI, not only are you getting that headless execution of the test cases and test scripts that you've created in both versions, but with SoapUI Pro, the real difference is being able to integrate reporting based on coverage and the passes and fails of those test scripts, and just having a little bit more of a UI element to set that up, being able to have maybe a little bit less technical of a QA or test member of your team to be able to set that up in SoapUI Pro, as opposed to something a little bit more technical, a little bit more script heavy in open source.
All right, awesome. Let's see. Do you have to physically attach the iOS device to a Mac or Windows machine to run for mobile testing?
Yes, so as of now, you are going to need to physically tether your iOS device to the machine where TestComplete is executing for those tests to run. It's worth noting the same is not true with Android, because we can actually use the network connection in your office to send those instructions across.
Okay, and then does TestComplete integrate with Sauce Labs? I can actually answer that one. Currently, right now, it does not. We integrate with a CrossBrowser Testing, which is kind of our own version of Sauce Labs with a lot of the same functionality, but we have that natively outside the box. All right, sorry, I'm just kind of running through some of these. Do both of these products work on a Mac workstation?
So in the case of TestComplete, it is unfortunately Windows only at this time.
And ReadyAPI can be run and installed on Mac and Linux operating systems. And likewise, the test runner script will be using a shell script instead of a batch script for Windows.
And then CrossBrowser Testing is a cloud solution, so it can be accessed also from Mac, Windows, or Linux machine as well. All right, I think we're going to do one last question, and it's just kind of how are the objects added to the repository? Like, some people are asking if you can reference them in scripting, but you want to just talk real quick about that.
Yeah, of course. So there's two primary ways you're going to add these new objects. The first way is by going into the name mapping itself and telling it that you wish to add a new object, and then you'll point to it and we'll add it to the hierarchy wherever it's most appropriate. The other way objects can be added is through recording. If you are recording a test and you interact with an object, we're going to automatically add that to our repository once the test is done. Once you have objects in your repository, you can leverage them throughout the TestComplete tool. So if you ever record a new test that interacts with the same objects, we're going to pull that information from the name mapping. You can do the same thing with scripting.
Awesome, awesome. All right, so now we are going to run this last poll and kick it off, and we'll share that with you as we close out of here. Just want to thank Nick and Mike for helping us out today and walking us through that awesome demo of both products. We're up here right now, though. Which tools are you interested in learning more about after that presentation? But you have SoapUI or TestComplete to pick from. Everyone, I hope you have a great rest of your week, and thanks for joining us on automating different layers, UI and API testing with SmartBear. Thank you all.